I could feel their eyes on me the moment I walked through the double doors of the funeral home. Heavy, icy, and unblinking. The shift in the room felt almost physical, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees just because I'd shown up. Hushed whispers fluttered at the edges of my hearing, the kind people pretend are reverent but are actually sharpened like blades. The scent of too many condolence flowers, lilies, roses, something powdery and suffocating, hung thick in the air, doing nothing to soften the atmosphere. My father had been dead for 3 days, and yet the judgment was already fully assembled, polished, and ready for display. If anything, his death seemed to give them permission to let their real opinions slip through even more openly. In this family, grief wasn't a unifying force. It was a chance to measure, to compare, to classify who had succeeded and who had failed. And I already knew exactly which category they'd always placed me in. I adjusted the tie at my throat, the only decent one I owned, and even it was borrowed, and tried to steady my breath. The fabric felt too tight, too formal for someone like me, but I made myself move toward the front row where my family had gathered like a murder of crows circling fresh roadkill. They weren't mourning, they were strategizing, calculating, evaluating how this death would shift the balance of power, attention, and, let's be honest, inheritance. Mark, my older brother, was positioned at the center of the group like a CEO holding court. His suit looked like it had been tailored by a man who tailored for other tailors. His posture was immaculate, his hair in place, his grief measured to look photogenic. When he saw me approach, his lips curled upward in a smirk so smooth it could have been rehearsed in the mirror beforehand. Knowing him, it probably was. He leaned toward our Aunt Patricia and murmured something behind a polite cough, but I saw the reaction anyway. She glanced at me, her expression twisting into a cocktail of pity, disdain, and that familiar family disappointment I had come to recognize long ago. She shook her head subtly, as if I had already done something wrong by breathing the same air as the rest of them. "Look who finally decided to show up," Mark announced, making sure his voice carried just enough to capture the attention of half the room. His tone was sugar-laced poison. "The prodigal son graces us with his presence." A few heads turned, a few eyebrows lifted. No one looked surprised. I didn't respond. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't feed into the narrative he wanted. What was I going to do? Explain? Tell them that I'd driven 6 straight hours through the night because my car rattled ominously if pushed above 70 km/h? That I'd borrowed the suit from a friend because I couldn't justify spending my grocery budget on clothing? That while Mark had climbed the real estate mogul ladder with the efficiency of a man born to wealth, I had been juggling 2 jobs just to stay afloat? None of that mattered here. In this family, money wasn't just a resource. It was the measure of a person's worth. Wealth equaled virtue. Success equaled moral superiority. And I had neither. "We were beginning to think you wouldn't come," my cousin Jennifer chimed in, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness that made my teeth ache. "That would have been terribly inappropriate." "I'm here," I said simply, and slid into a seat at the very end of the row, putting as much physical space between myself and Mark as the room allowed. The service began, polished and pristine in the expensive way that looks dignified but feels hollow. A pastor who had never once shaken my father's hand stood before us and spoke in sweeping, generalized terms about a man he clearly didn't know. Words like dedicated, respected, pillar of the community, loving father floated through the air with the insincerity of a sales pitch. Then Mark stood to deliver the eulogy. Every sentence was smooth, choreographed, and engineered for maximum admiration. It was the kind of speech that would have made sense if he were unveiling a corporate merger rather than talking about our father. He used phrases like self-made man, visionary, example to us all. The audience nodded obediently. I sat there wondering if I was at the wrong funeral. My father had been many things, brilliant, relentless, intimidating, but tender, warm, gentle. Those were fantasies. He'd built his construction company from absolute nothing, yes, but he'd also expected his sons to replicate that hunger. Mark had been molded perfectly for that world, sharp, ambitious, ruthless. He joined the business straight out of college, learning the trade, the negotiations, the manipulation of margins and contractors and subcontracts. I had wanted something different. I had wanted to teach. That single decision cracked the foundation between us. It wasn't just disappointment, it was a wound that never fully closed. "Teachers are for people who can't do," he'd told me the day I announced it. "You're choosing poverty on purpose. Don't come running back when the world chews you up." So I hadn't run back. I hadn't run anywhere near him. Our communication had dwindled to a handful of mandatory holiday calls over the years, awkward exchanges where we both pretended things were normal while knowing they never had been. Now he was gone. And my grief came in strange, messy shades. sadness for what we never had, guilt for the quiet relief I felt at no longer being a disappointment, and something sharp and unnameable buried beneath all of that. After the service, we moved to my father's house. No, his estate. A sprawling suburban palace with marble counters and vaulted ceilings where I had spent my childhood feeling too quiet, too soft, too small. The wake was fully catered, of course. Mark wouldn't allow anything less than top-tier presentation, even for mourning. I stood off to the side, nursing a glass of wine I wasn't drinking, observing the room. My relatives weren't grieving, they were networking. They spoke in low tones about investments, properties, market trends. Even in death, the family business model remained unchanged. Everything is leverage. "You look uncomfortable," a voice said. I turned and found Sarah beside me, Mark's wife. Her expression held something that resembled genuine concern, maybe even warmth. She'd always been different from the rest of them, gentler, softer around the edges. "Just tired," I replied. "It's been a long day," she said quietly. She hesitated, then asked, "How have you been? Really?" I exhaled slowly, getting by. She nodded, understanding without pressing further. "If you need anything—" "Sarah!" Mark's voice cut across the room like a whip crack. "I need you over here." She shot me an apologetic look before hurrying to him. He wrapped an arm around her waist protectively, then glanced at me over her shoulder. His eyes were cold, hard, evaluative, like he was silently reminding me of my place. Even across the crowded room, I could feel his contempt, sharp, bright, unmistakable. And that was where the moment ended. The afternoon dragged on with a heaviness that felt almost physical, as if the minutes themselves were weighted down by the smell of catered food and the low hum of forced condolences. Time stretched and warped inside that house. Every conversation I had with a relative felt like a scripted performance they didn't bother rehearsing. Most of them barely remembered me. Some couldn't recall where I lived now. Others confused me with Mark's old college friends. Still, they clasped my hand, repeated hollow phrases like, "Your father was a great man," and moved on before I could reply. I answered them with the same neutral politeness people use when speaking to someone they don't expect to see again. Mostly, I nodded, smiled when it felt necessary, pretended the tightness in my chest was boredom, not humiliation. I kept glancing at the clock on the wall behind the bar, its gold rim gleaming under the chandelier, counting the minutes until I could leave without causing a scene. The second hand seemed to crawl, dragging its feet in open defiance of my impatience. The longer I stayed, the more I felt that old sense of shrinking, of becoming the background character I had always been in this family. Then the lawyer arrived. The chatter dimmed on instinct. Even I straightened a little. James Thornton stepped inside with the quiet confidence of a man who had walked into many wealthy homes and never once been out of place. He was older now, thinner, more lined, his steel gray hair combed with mechanical precision, but his expression was as unreadable as ever. He carried his leather briefcase like a badge of office, the kind of object that had lived more lives than most people. "If everyone could please gather in the dining room," he announced in his calm, formal baritone. "We'll proceed with the reading of the will." It was as if someone had flipped a switch. The room fell nearly silent. People abandoned their plates, drinks, half-finished stories. This was what they'd really come for. Not grief, not remembrance, not family unity. The money, the legacy, the hierarchy. We filed into the dining room like obedient congregants moving toward an altar. The long mahogany table gleamed under the soft lights, polished so perfectly I could see reflections of the crystal chandelier in its surface. Everyone tried to maintain the facade of solemnity, but their eyes betrayed them, sharp, hungry, expectant. Mark took the seat at the head of the table, my father's seat, without hesitation. He didn't even pretend to wait for permission. He slid into the chair with casual entitlement, fingers drumming lightly on the carved wooden armrests, a man assuming his rightful throne. I sat at the opposite end, almost out of view, exactly where they liked me, present but far from important. "Mr." Thornton opened his old briefcase with a soft click and withdrew a thick stack of documents bound with a black clip. Papers heavy with decades of wealth, power, and legacy. Papers that would decide what pieces of my father's life were deemed valuable, and to whom. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began. What followed was a river of legalese. Phrases about witnesses, signatures, dates, clauses. I tried to focus, but the words washed over me like sterile white noise. Instead, I watched the faces around the table. Mark leaned back in his chair, wearing the relaxed expression of someone who already knew the outcome. His jaw tight, his smirk lazy, his posture confident. He was already living in the afterglow of victory that hadn't yet been spoken aloud. Aunt Patricia sat upright, fingers interlocked as though praying, though I suspected her prayers were less spiritual and more financial. Jennifer and Thomas exchanged glances so subtle they looked choreographed, anticipation tightening their expressions, their excitement barely contained behind polite smiles. They were a pack waiting to see how the carcass would be divided. Finally, Mr. Thornton reached the first bequest. To my sister, Patricia Morrison Blackwell, I leave the lake cabin in Millerton and all its contents, along with a trust fund of $200,000 for its maintenance and her comfort. A gasp slipped out of Aunt Patricia's mouth before she covered it with her hand. Her eyes filled with theatrical tears that appeared too quickly, too conveniently. "Oh my," she whispered. "Oh, Robert." The room rippled with congratulatory murmurs. Hands squeezed her shoulders. Someone handed her a fresh glass of wine. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief so pristine it looked never used. The next bequests rolled out like a parade of generosity. To my nephew, Thomas, my first edition book collection and $75,000. Thomas grinned like he'd won a prize on a game show. To my niece, Jennifer, my mother's jewelry collection and $75,000. Jennifer practically glowed, whispering excitedly behind her hand to her brother. One after another, my father's wealth was distributed to people who had adored him, disdained him, or rarely visited him. They all received something: land, money, heirlooms, investments, even sentimental items that I hadn't known he cared about. Even the housekeeper, Elena, who'd been with my father for 18 years and had treated me with more kindness than most blood relatives, received a year's salary and a letter of recommendation that Mr. Thornton described as deeply heartfelt. Good for her. She deserved it. The energy in the room swelled with each new name, each new amount. People whispered, recalculated, judged one another's fortunes. It became clear my father had been even wealthier than he let on. The numbers were staggering, bigger than any of us had imagined. Then the big one came. To my son, Mark Robert Morrison, Mr. Thornton read, voice steady. I leave controlling interest in Morrison Construction Company, including all assets, properties, and holdings associated therewith. Additionally, I leave him the family home and all its contents, the investment portfolio managed by Cornerstone Financial, and a cash inheritance of $500,000. Pandemonium. Chairs scraped. Someone clapped loudly. Champagne corks popped as if cued. Mark was swallowed by a crowd of well-wishers, hands patting his back, arms thrown around him, voices praising him. This is incredible. He deserves it. Robert always knew Mark would carry the torch. Mark nodded humbly, though his eyes gleamed with something closer to triumph than grief. I'll honor Dad's legacy, he said. It's what he wanted. Of course it was. I stayed seated, untouched by the whirlwind of celebration. I felt strangely calm, almost relieved. I hadn't expected anything, and I didn't want the company. I didn't want the house. I didn't want the empire. I had spent my entire life being told I was unworthy of it. Why would that change now? As the guests settled back into their seats, flushed with champagne and envy, Mark lounged in my father's chair like a king surveying his kingdom. Mr. Thornton adjusted his papers. That concludes the major bequests. There are a few smaller items. What about him? Mark interrupted, gesturing toward me with his champagne glass. His voice carried easily across the table. Don't tell me Dad forgot his other son. My stomach tightened. The way he said other son, dripping with disdain, as if my existence was an inconvenient administrative detail. Mr. Thornton hesitated, then reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a single plain white envelope, business-sized, unadorned, my name written across the front in my father's sharp, unmistakable handwriting. He walked the length of the table. The entire room watched. You could have heard a pin drop. He placed the envelope in front of me, his expression unreadable. That was it? An envelope. That's it? Jennifer asked, eyebrows lifting. Just an envelope? Soft laughter spread around the table. Not cruel at first, just amused, confused, speculative, but it shifted quickly, turning sharper as Mark raised his glass. His voice sliced through the room. Even the dead think you're useless. Silence. Then a stifled snicker. Then another. And suddenly the table erupted in laughter, hidden behind hands, behind wine glasses, but unmistakably directed at me. Heat crawled up my neck. My face burned. My hands tightened on the envelope until the edges dug into my skin. Mark, Sarah said quietly, eyes flashing with disapproval. Enough. He ignored her. Oh, come on, he continued. We all get actual inheritances. Houses, money, businesses. And he gets... what? A letter? Maybe a $20 bill and a message to grow up? More laughter. I began to stand. I didn't trust myself to speak. If I did, something sharp would come out, something I couldn't take back. Leaving was the safest thing, but Mr. Thornton spoke before I could take a step. "Your father left specific instructions," he said, voice firm. "The envelope is to be read alone. No one else is to see its contents." The laughter cut off instantly. Even Mark stilled. "Alone?" Aunt Patricia repeated. "Why alone?" "That was Mr. Morrison's explicit wish," the lawyer said, tone brooking no argument. "He instructed me to ensure his son reads it privately." Mark scoffed loudly. "Oh, please. What? Are we acting out a soap opera now? Just open it. We're family." "I don't think," I began. "Are you really going to make this dramatic?" Mark snapped. "Just open the damn thing. Unless you're afraid it's as pathetic as—" "That," Mr. Thornton said sharply, "is enough." Silence fell again. A real silence. Heavy and tense. It was the first time I'd ever heard the lawyer raise his voice. "Mr. Morrison's wishes were legally binding," he continued. "The contents are private." He packed his briefcase briskly, nodding to the room. "This concludes the reading of the will. Any inquiries can be directed to my office. Good afternoon." He left before anyone could object. The dining room immediately erupted into speculation. What's in it? Maybe instructions? Maybe a confession? Maybe nothing. Mark drained his champagne. "Probably an apology for wasting his life," he said. "Or a list of job openings." "Mark," Sarah said again, more sharply this time. "It's fine," I murmured, though it wasn't. Not really. I stood. The envelope felt heavier now. Not in weight, but in significance. Everyone's eyes followed me as I left the room. "Running away?" Mark called. Typical. I didn't answer. I walked through the house, past the clusters of relatives gossiping about the will, past the photos of my father shaking hands with important people, past the furniture he loved but never let anyone touch, out the front door, into the cold, quiet air. I reached my old car, sank into the driver's seat, and shut the door. The silence felt different out here. Cleaner. Real. The envelope lay on the passenger seat. Plain. Unassuming. Innocent. It sat there like a question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. I stared at it for a long time. Long enough for the engine to grow cold again. Long enough for my hands to stop shaking. Only then did I reach for it. Only then did I begin to tear it open. The afternoon sun was starting to slant through the windshield. I could see relatives leaving through the rearview mirror, getting into their expensive cars, probably heading out to celebrate their windfalls. My hands shook slightly as I picked up the envelope. There was something about the weight of it, or rather, the lack of weight, that felt ominous. What could be inside? A letter explaining why I'd been written out of the will? A final lecture about my failures? I tore open the seal. Inside was a single item, a USB drive. Small, black, generic. No note, no explanation. Just the drive. I turned it over in my palm, looking for any marking, any clue to what it contained. Nothing. It was completely blank. Then I noticed something else in the envelope. A piece of paper I'd missed, folded so small it had been hidden in the corner. I pulled it out and unfolded it. My father's handwriting. Just a few lines, written in the shaky hand of someone who was very sick. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. I need you to finish what I started. Everything is on the drive. Don't trust anyone, especially Mark. The lawyer knows. You were always the strong one, even when I couldn't see it. Forgive an old fool. Dad." I read it 3 times, my heart pounding harder with each pass. Don't trust anyone, especially Mark. What did that mean? And what was on the drive? I looked up at the house. Through the front windows, I could see people still mingling, still celebrating. Mark's silhouette was unmistakable, tall, broad-shouldered, gesturing expansively as he held court. I pulled out my laptop from the back seat. It was old, the screen slightly cracked, but it worked. My hands were steadier now, driven by something between fear and curiosity. The USB drive slid into the port with a soft click. A window popped up immediately. Morrison documents. Inside were folders. Lots of them. I clicked on the first one. Bank statements. The files loaded. Page after page of financial records from banks I recognized and some I didn't. Personal accounts, business accounts, investment accounts. I started scrolling, trying to make sense of the numbers. That's when I saw it. An account in my father's name at a bank in the Cayman Islands. The balance made me blink and read it again, certain I'd misunderstood. $2,147,392 or 67. Nearly $3 million. In one account. An account that had never been mentioned in the will. I clicked on another folder. Properties. Deeds and titles scrolled across my screen. A commercial building in downtown Seattle, a rental complex in Phoenix, a warehouse in Houston, 3 parcels of undeveloped land in Montana, on and on. Properties I'd never heard my father mention, properties that hadn't been part of the estate reading. I did quick mental math based on the appraised values listed. Conservatively, we were talking about another $10 million in real estate. My father had been rich. Not comfortable, not well off. Rich. The next folder was labeled Transfers. I opened it with shaking hands. Wire transfers. Dozens of them. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moving from my father's accounts to... I squinted at the receiving account numbers, trying to make sense of them. Then I saw one I recognized. One of Mark's personal accounts. The number visible on a bank statement visible in one of the earlier folders I'd opened. I started clicking through the transfers, my stomach sinking with each one. $50,000 in March 2021. Consulting fee. $75,000 in July 2021. Business development. $100,000 in October 2021. Investment opportunity. $125,000 in January 2022. Project expansion. They got larger and more frequent over time. By 2023, Mark was pulling money from my father's accounts almost monthly. Some transfers had legitimate-sounding descriptions. Others just said family loan or personal advance. I added them up. Over 3 years, Mark had taken nearly $800,000 from my father. But there was something else in the folder, a subfolder labeled Recordings. I clicked on it, and my screen filled with audio files, each one labeled with a date and time. I plugged in my headphones and clicked on the earliest one, dated 3 years ago. My father's voice filled my ears, strained and tired. Tuesday, March 16th, recording my conversation with Mark as instructed by counsel. Then Mark's voice, cheerful, "Hey, Dad, got a minute?" What followed was a conversation about Morrison Construction Company needing a cash infusion for a can't-miss opportunity. My father asked questions, reasonable questions about business plans and projected returns, and Mark had smooth answers for all of them. "I just need to transfer $100,000 into the business account temporarily," Mark said. "I'll have it back to you in 60 days with 20% interest, I promise." "You said that last time," my father replied. His voice was gentle but firm. "And the time before that. The money never comes back, son." "This is different, I swear. Dad, you have to trust me." A long pause. Then my father, sounding defeated, "All right, but this is the last time, Mark." "Absolutely. You won't regret this." The recording ended. I clicked on another one from 6 months later. Another request, another promise, another transfer. My father's voice sounded older, more tired. I clicked on a recording from last year. This one was different. "Mark, I have the bank statements in front of me." My father's voice was cold now, angry. "You've been taking money from the Montana account, money you weren't authorized to touch." "I can explain. You've been stealing from me." "Dad, no, I was just borrowing." "Stealing from your own father, while I was in the hospital, while I was sick. I was going to pay it back." "When?" "You've taken over $400,000 from accounts you had no right to access. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I'd die before I figured it out?" Mark's voice changed, hardened. "You've always had enough. What does it matter if I take some? You were going to leave it to me anyway." "I was. I'm not so sure anymore." "You can't be serious. I've given my life to your company. You've stolen from me. You've lied to me. You've used my love for you against me." "Fine." Mark's voice was ice now. "Fine. You want to play it that way? You're a senile old man. Everyone knows it. No one will believe you." The recording ended. I sat frozen, headphones still in, staring at the laptop screen. There were more recordings, more evidence, but I couldn't listen anymore. My brain was too full, too loud with the implications of everything I'd just learned. The last folder was labeled simply "For My Son." I clicked on it. Inside was a single video file. I hesitated, then double-clicked. My father's face appeared on screen. He was in his study at home, sitting at his desk. The timestamp said the video was recorded 3 weeks before he died. He looked terrible, gaunt, pale, his skin hanging off bones that had once been covered with muscle. "Hello, son," he said. His voice was weak but clear. "If you're watching this, I'm gone, and you're probably wondering what the hell is going on." He smiled slightly. It was a sad smile. "I owe you an apology. More than one. I owe you a lifetime of them." He paused, gathering strength. I was wrong about you, about who you are, what you wanted from life. I thought strength meant building empires, making money, crushing competition. I thought sensitivity was weakness and kindness was for people who couldn't hack it in the real world. He shook his head slowly. I pushed you away because you reminded me of someone I used to be, someone I'd buried under 30 years of ruthlessness and greed. You reminded me of who I could have been if I'd had your courage. Tears pricked at my eyes. I couldn't remember my father ever talking like this. Mark is my son, and I love him, but he's become what I made him, hungry, ruthless, so focused on winning that he can't see what he's losing. He's been stealing from me for 3 years. At first, I made excuses for him, told myself he was just aggressive, just ambitious. But then he started taking from accounts he had no authority to access, forging my signature, using my illness against me. My father's hand trembled as he picked up a glass of water and took a sip. The drive contains evidence of everything: bank statements, wire transfers, recordings of our conversations. I've also included documents showing the full extent of my estate: the real estate, the offshore accounts, the investments I kept quiet. The estate Mark inherited, that's roughly 40% of what I actually have. The rest, he looked directly at the camera, directly at me. The rest goes to you, all of it. The properties, the accounts, everything on that drive. It's been transferred to trusts in your name. Legal, documented, ironclad. James Thornton has copies of everything. He's prepared the paperwork. The moment you walk into his office with that drive, he'll begin the transfer process. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I'm not doing this to punish Mark, though God knows he deserves it. I'm doing this because you're the only person I trust. You're the only one who never wanted anything from me except my approval, which I was too stubborn to give. You're the only one who became something on your own, without my money or my name behind you. He leaned forward slightly. They're going to come after you when they find out, Mark especially. They'll say you manipulated me, that I was senile, that you somehow tricked a dying old man. Let them talk. The evidence is airtight. The law is on your side. But more importantly, the truth is on your side. A coughing fit seized him. It lasted almost 30 seconds, painful to watch. When he finally got it under control, his eyes were watering. You have a choice to make, he continued. You can give it all to Mark, make peace with the family, buy their love with my money, or... He smiled again, that same sad smile. Or you can use it to build something good, something that helps people, something I should have built instead of an empire of gravel and concrete. He was quiet for a long moment. I wish I'd been a better father to you. I wish I'd told you I was proud of you for becoming a teacher, for choosing meaning over money. I wish I'd said a lot of things. His voice cracked. I hope this is enough to show you that I saw you, that I knew who you really were, that despite everything, I loved you. Tears were streaming down my face now. Don't let them make you feel small. Don't let them convince you that you don't deserve this. You're the only one who does. You were always the strong one, even when I couldn't see it, especially when I couldn't see it. He reached forward toward the camera. Forgive an old fool if you can. The screen went black. I sat in my car, laptop on my knees, crying harder than I had at the funeral. Crying for the father I'd lost, for the relationship we'd never had, for the words that came too late. But underneath the grief was something else, something that grew stronger with each breath. Anger. Mark had stolen from our father. He'd lied, manipulated, and abused the trust of a dying man. And he'd gotten away with it, or thought he had. He'd stood up at that funeral and given his polished eulogy, accepted everyone's congratulations, claimed his inheritance with a straight face. And he'd humiliated me, called me useless in a room full of our relatives, knowing they'd laugh, knowing I had no defense. I looked at the house again. The celebration was still going on. Through the windows, I could see Mark refilling his glass, gesturing grandly, the center of attention. My phone buzzed, a text from Mr. Thornton. When you're ready, call me. We have much to discuss. Your father prepared for everything. I wiped my eyes, closed the laptop, put the USB drive carefully back in the envelope. Then I started the car and drove away. But I didn't go home. I spent that night in a hotel room, reviewing every file on the USB drive until my eyes burned and my brain couldn't process any more numbers. The full scope of what my father had left me was staggering. Between the properties, the offshore accounts, the investment portfolios, and the cash trusts, I was looking at somewhere between $15 and $18 million. More money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. And every dollar of it should have been shared with Mark. Would have been if he hadn't gotten greedy. If he hadn't betrayed our father's trust in the cruelest possible way. I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the recordings, Mark's voice shifting from honey-sweet manipulation to cold contempt. I kept seeing my father's face in that final video, the regret and love shining through his exhaustion. At 8 a.m., I called Mr. Thornton. "I've reviewed everything," I told him. "And?" His voice was carefully neutral, "and I need to know what happens next." We met at his office an hour later. He walked me through the legal framework my father had constructed, a maze of trusts and transfers designed to be completely ironclad. Mr. Thornton had been working with my father for over a year, documenting everything, preparing for every possible challenge. "Your father was very thorough," he said. He knew Mark would contest this. He wanted to make sure there was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The offshore accounts were transferred to trusts in your name 6 months ago. The properties were deeded to those same trusts 4 months ago. All completely legal, all documented, all witnessed and notarized. But the will reading was accurate. Mark received everything your father specified in his will. What Mark didn't know is that the will only covered 40% of your father's actual estate. The rest had already been distributed prior to your father's death. It was brilliant, really. My father had given Mark exactly what he'd promised, controlling interest in Morrison construction and a substantial cash inheritance. He just hadn't mentioned that he'd quietly moved most of his wealth out of his estate before he died. "When does Mark find out?" I asked. Mr. Thornton looked at me steadily. "That's up to you. We can notify him through formal channels or—" He paused. "Your father left some suggestions for how he thought this should be handled. He felt strongly that the family should know what Mark had done." "You mean he wanted me to expose him?" "He wanted the truth to come out. How that happens is your choice." I thought about it. I could do this quietly, take my inheritance and disappear, let Mark keep his ill-gotten gains and his reputation. It would be easier, cleaner. But then I remembered his voice at the will reading. "Even the dead think you're useless." I remembered the laughter of my relatives, the years of being treated like a failure, like a disappointment. Most of all, I remembered my father's voice on those recordings, tired and betrayed, trying to understand how his son could steal from him. "What did my father suggest?" I asked. Mr. Thornton allowed himself a small smile. "He suggested a family meeting, all the same people who were present at the will reading. He prepared a statement to be read aloud, along with selected evidence from the drive. He wanted everyone to understand why he made the choices he did." "That would destroy Mark." "Yes," Mr. Thornton agreed. "It would." I thought about Sarah, Mark's wife. She'd always been kind to me. And their kids, my niece and nephew, they didn't deserve to be caught in this. But they also deserved to know who their father really was. "Set it up," I said. The meeting was scheduled for 3 days later, back at my father's house. Mr. Thornton sent formal invitations to everyone who'd been at the will reading, stating only that there were additional matters regarding the estate that require attention. I'm sure they all assumed it was some minor detail, paperwork that needed signing, a formality. I'm sure Mark thought it was about him assuming control of the company, maybe some procedure he needed to complete. I wondered what he'd think when he saw me walk in. I arrived early while Mr. Thornton was setting up. He'd brought a projector and a screen, along with a laptop and a thick folder of printed documents. "Are you sure about this?" he asked me. I nodded. My hands were sweating, my heart racing, but I was sure. My father wanted the truth to come out, and they need to know what kind of man they've been celebrating. The relatives started arriving right on time. They came in laughing and chatting, still riding high on their windfalls, greeting each other warmly. I watched from the hallway as they filed into the living room, taking seats on the sofas and chairs. Mark and Sarah arrived last. Mark was in business casual, clearly coming from the office. His office now, at Morrison Construction. He was talking on his phone, gesturing with his free hand, every inch the successful executive. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me standing in the hallway. "What are you doing here?" he asked, lowering his phone. "I was invited," I said calmly. His eyes narrowed. "This is about company business. It doesn't concern you." "Actually," Mr. Thornton said, appearing behind me, "this concerns everyone in your family. Shall we begin?" We filed into the living room. Every seat was taken, so I stood against the wall near Mr. Thornton's presentation setup. Mark shot me suspicious looks as he settled into the armchair, my father's chair again. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Thornton began. "I know the invitation was somewhat vague, but your presence here is important. This meeting concerns additional aspects of Robert Morrison's estate that were not addressed at the initial reading." A murmur rippled through the room. Jennifer leaned toward Thomas and whispered something. Aunt Patricia sat up straighter, her interest piqued. "As you know," Mr. Thornton continued, The will reading 3 days ago distributed significant assets among the family. However, it has come to light that the estate included additional holdings that were not mentioned at that time. Mark's expression shifted subtly. The confidence flickered. What kind of additional holdings? Aunt Patricia asked. Substantial ones, including but not limited to multiple commercial properties, residential rental complexes, undeveloped land, offshore accounts, and various investment portfolios. Together, these assets total approximately $15 million. The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once, throwing questions at Mr. Thornton, at each other. Why weren't these mentioned before? Where did this money come from? Who gets it? Does this mean there's more for everyone? Mark's face had gone pale. His knuckles were white where he gripped the arms of the chair. Mr. Thornton raised his hand for silence. Please, let me explain. These assets were not mentioned at the initial reading because they were not part of Robert Morrison's estate at the time of his death. He had transferred them, legally and with full documentation, into irrevocable trusts prior to his passing. Trusts for who? Mark demanded. Mr. Thornton looked at me. For his younger son. Every head in the room swiveled toward me. That's impossible, Mark said flatly. Dad would never. Your father, Mr. Thornton interrupted, his voice sharp, left explicit instructions regarding how and why he made this decision. He wanted everyone in this room to understand his reasoning. With his younger son's permission, I'm going to share that explanation now. He gestured to me. I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. Mr. Thornton dimmed the lights and turned on the projector. My father's face appeared on the screen, frozen at the start of the video I'd watched in my car. Even in still image, he looked tired, sick, but determined. This is a video statement Robert Morrison recorded 3 weeks before his death, Mr. Thornton said. He asked that it be shown to the family in the event that questions arose about his final decisions. He pressed play. My father's voice filled the room. If you're watching this, it means my son has chosen to reveal the truth. I left him that choice because I wanted him to decide how to handle what I'm about to tell you. What I need you all to understand is why I made the choices I did regarding my estate. The room was dead silent. Everyone was leaning forward, transfixed. For the past 3 years, my father continued, someone has been stealing from me. Someone I trusted. Someone who had access to my accounts because I'd given it to him in good faith, believing he was using that access to help manage the family business. Mark had gone from pale to gray. Sweat beaded on his forehead. My son Mark has taken approximately $800,000 from various accounts over the past 3 years. At first, they were loans he promised to repay. Then they became unauthorized transfers he claimed were for business purposes. Finally, when I was in the hospital last year, he began simply taking money from accounts he had no right to access, forging my signature on transfer requests. Gasps echoed through the room. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Aunt Patricia looked horrified. Liar, Mark said, but his voice was weak. He was senile. He didn't know. I have recordings, my father's voice said, as if anticipating this exact objection. Conversations with Mark, where he admits to taking the money, where he promises to pay it back, where he eventually stops pretending it's a loan and just takes what he wants. I have bank statements showing the transfers. I have witnesses who can verify that I was of sound mind when I made these recordings and when I restructured my estate. Mr. Thornton paused the video. Would you like to hear the recordings? He asked Mark politely. No, Mark said quickly. Too quickly. This is ridiculous. Everyone knows Dad was confused toward the end. He probably got his accounts mixed up, thought, Then you won't mind if we play them, Mr. Thornton said. He clicked on an audio file. My father's voice, Tuesday, March 16th, recording my conversation with Mark as instructed by counsel. Then Mark's voice, clear as day. Hey, Dad, got a minute? Mr. Thornton let the recording play for about 2 minutes, just enough for everyone to hear Mark asking for money, making promises, my father reluctantly agreeing. Then he skipped ahead to the last recording, the one where my father confronted Mark about the theft. You've been stealing from me. Dad, no, I was just borrowing. Stealing from your own father, while I was in the hospital, while I was sick. Sarah made a sound like a wounded animal. She was staring at Mark with an expression of horror and betrayal. Mr. Thornton stopped the playback. There are 47 more recordings documenting similar conversations. I have them all here if anyone would like to review them. No one spoke. They were all staring at Mark. Mark? Aunt Patricia's voice was small, confused. Is this true? Mark's face had transformed. All the charm, all the confidence was gone. What remained was something ugly and desperate. He owed me, Mark snarled. I built that company with him. I gave him my life, so I took what was mine. What should have been mine anyway. It wasn't yours, I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken. It was his. He built that company before you were born. Everything you have, everything you are, is because he gave it to you. Mark's eyes locked on mine. Pure hatred radiated from them. You did this, he said. You poisoned him against me. You manipulated a sick old man. Mark, Mr. Thornton said sharply, your father made these recordings over a 3-year period. He restructured his estate 6 months ago, while he was still healthy enough to walk me through every detail of his reasoning. Multiple medical professionals have reviewed his condition at the time and certified that he was of completely sound mind. There is no legal basis for challenging these decisions, and trying to do so will only expose you to prosecution for theft and fraud. He let that sink in before continuing. Your father loved you. That's why he still left you controlling interest in Morrison Construction and a substantial inheritance. But he loved his other son too, the son who never asked for anything, the son who made his own way in the world, the son he could trust. Mr. Thornton looked at me. Would you like to say anything? I stepped forward, looked at Mark, at the family who'd dismissed me, at the relatives who'd laughed when my brother called me useless. I don't want revenge, I said. I don't want to ruin anyone, but I'm not going to pretend anymore. I'm not going to act like it's okay that I was treated like a failure for choosing a different path, and I'm not going to let anyone rewrite history to make this seem like I somehow stole what Mark deserved. I pulled the envelope from my pocket, the one that had caused so much mockery 3 days ago, and held it up. This envelope contained evidence of everything you just heard. My father trusted me with the truth because I was the only one who'd never lied to him, never stolen from him, never used his love against him. I looked at Mark. His eyes were shining with rage and unshed tears. You called me useless, I said softly. Even the dead think I'm useless, you said. But I'm not the one who stole from my dying father. I'm not the one who betrayed the person who trusted me most in the world. So maybe, just maybe, you've been wrong about who's useless all along. The room was absolutely silent. If anyone has questions about the estate or the trusts, Mr. Thornton can answer them, I said. Otherwise, I think we're done here. I turned and walked toward the door. Wait! Sarah's voice stopped me. I turned back. She was standing, tears streaming down her face. Did you know? She asked Mark. When you stood up at the funeral and gave that speech about what a great man he was, what a wonderful father, did you know what you'd done to him? Mark didn't answer. He couldn't even look at her. Sarah picked up her purse. I'm taking the kids to my mother's, she said. Her voice was eerily calm. Don't come home tonight, Mark. Don't call me. I need to figure out if I still know who I'm married to. She walked out. One by one, the other relatives stood and left. Some glared at Mark. Some looked confused or betrayed. A few tried to catch my eye, perhaps looking for forgiveness or understanding, but I had nothing to give them. Aunt Patricia stopped in front of Mark's chair. Your father gave you everything, she said quietly, and it still wasn't enough. I'm ashamed to be your family. Finally, only Mark and Mr. Thornton and I remained. Mark sat in my father's chair, staring at nothing, his empire of lies crumbling around him. The business is still yours, I said. The house, the money he left you. He didn't take those away even after everything. He still loved you, Mark. He just couldn't trust you. Mark's jaw clenched. Get out. Gladly. I walked out of my father's house for the last time. Mr. Thornton followed, carrying his presentation equipment. What will you do with it? He asked as we stood by our cars. The money. I thought about my father's words in the video, about building something good, something that helps people. I'm not sure yet, I admitted. But whatever it is, it'll be something he'd be proud of, something that matters. Mr. Thornton smiled. He already was proud of you. He told me that, near the end, said you were the only thing he got right. My eyes burned, but I was done crying. I have one question, I said. Why didn't he just confront Mark, cut him off before it got this bad? He tried, multiple times, but every time Mark would apologize, promise to change, and your father would give him another chance. He loved his son. It took him a long time to accept that love wasn't enough to fix what was broken. I nodded slowly. I understood that. I'd spent years trying to earn my father's approval, never understanding that the problem wasn't me. There's one more thing, Mr. Thornton said. He handed me a small envelope, a real letter this time, in my father's handwriting. He asked me to give you this after everything was revealed, said you'd need it. I opened it right there, standing in the driveway. Dear son, by now you know everything. You know what Mark did. You know what I left you. You probably still have questions about why I didn't tell you sooner, why I let you think you were the disappointment. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that if I told you I was proud of you, if I admitted I'd been wrong about what matters in life, I'd have to face how much time I wasted. How many years I spent chasing money and power instead of building a relationship with the son who actually deserved one. You're free now, free from this family's expectations, free from the pressure to be something you're not, free from the shadow of a father who didn't know how to show love without strings attached. Use that freedom well. Be the man I couldn't be. Build the life I was too cowardly to choose. I'm sorry I was a fool for so long. I'm grateful you turned out better than me. Your father. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my pocket, next to the USB drive that had changed everything. 6 months later, I stood in front of a room full of educators at the dedication ceremony for the Morrison Foundation for Teachers. The foundation would provide grants, resources, and support for teachers in underfunded schools. The kind of schools I'd worked in, the kind of schools where dedicated people did impossible work for impossible pay. It was funded entirely by the inheritance my father had left me. In the end, I'd kept enough to pay off my debts, buy a reliable car, and put a down payment on a modest house. The rest, almost all of it, went into the foundation. It was what my father had wanted. Build something good, something that helps people. The foundation's first grant recipient was giving a speech, talking about how the money would let her buy actual textbooks for her students instead of making endless photocopies of old ones. I spotted Mr. Thornton in the audience. He'd agreed to serve on the foundation's board, ensuring everything was managed responsibly. I hadn't seen Mark since that day at the house. I'd heard through Aunt Patricia that Sarah had filed for divorce, that Mark was being investigated for embezzlement. Some of the money he'd taken from Dad had apparently come from company accounts, not just personal ones. That Morrison Construction was struggling under the weight of the scandal. I felt bad for him sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep. He was still my brother. But then I'd remember my father's voice on those recordings, the exhaustion and betrayal, and the sympathy would fade. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. After the ceremony, I drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. I'd visited a few times since his death, usually when I needed to think. I sat on the grass next to his headstone and told him about the foundation, about the teachers we'd help, about the difference his money would make now that it wasn't just accumulating in offshore accounts. I hope this is what you wanted, I said to the stone. I hope you're proud. The wind rustled through the trees. A bird called somewhere nearby. I thought about the envelope Mark had mocked. The envelope everyone had laughed at, certain it contained nothing of value. They'd been wrong. It had contained the truth. It had contained my father's trust. It had contained the heaviest and most precious inheritance of all. His belief that I was strong enough to bear the weight of his secrets and wise enough to do the right thing with them. I touched the cool marble of his headstone. Thank you, I said, for seeing me. Finally. I stood, brushed off my pants, and walked back to my car. I had a meeting with the Foundation's scholarship committee in an hour, and there were 50 new applications to review. I had work to do, important work, the kind of work that mattered, the kind of work my father had finally learned to value, even if he'd learned it too late. I drove away from the cemetery with the windows down, the afternoon sun warm on my face, feeling lighter than I had in years. Free, just like my father had promised, and I was going to use that freedom well.